Hi everyone, I'm Felix, creator of Hexagon Offense. In this video I'll talk about the many facets of Hex, including where the idea came from, how it fundamentally differs from stack offenses, why it works, how it's played, and how you can train a team to play it well. If you're only interested in one or two parts of this, then I've added a handy bar at the bottom so you can fast forward to the part that you want. First, here's a quick introduction to me for those who haven't seen me before. I've been playing Ultimate since the year 2000, winning UK Mixed Nationals and the European Championships with Brighton, playing for Clapham and GB Open in 2011, and more recently the GB Beach Masters in 2017. I've been coaching since around 2003, including the GB Under-23 team in 2015, the Sussex University team Mohawks, winning 3 outdoor national titles, 5 women outdoor national titles, and several indoor titles. Through the years, I've been involved in video production of the sport, running a company called Push Pass Productions from 2006 to 2011, and more recently working with UltiTV. Outside of Ultimate, I have a degree in Cognitive and Computer Science and Philosophy, specialising in logic, and I played the board game Go, arguably the most complex strategy game in the world, stemming from the simplest rule set and definitely an influence on my strategic thinking in Ultimate. In the past couple of years, I've been producing plenty of in-depth video analysis content of top games for my YouTube channel. I also have a cat called Rue, who's the real reason most people watch my videos. I played, captained, and coached Ultimate for around 12 years before I discovered Hex in 2012. My strategic history in Ultimate started with a very organic style in Brighton, loosely revolving around a horizontal stack, but with no set plays or patterns at all, lots of hammers, and that worked pretty well for us, earning us the national and European championships in 2009 and 2010. Then in Great Britain and Clapham teams in 2011, I was introduced to the idea of strict cutting orders, patterns, and set plays. In 2012, I sat down to watch Spain play football, dominating the Euro 2012 soccer championships. Spain's style differed from the other teams, as they passed the ball around a lot more, avoided 50-50 aerial battles wherever possible, and kept possession of the ball. The way they bounced the ball around the field, supporting each other with a network of players, ready to receive and give quick passes, and pouncing on any defensive overcommitment, I found absolutely captivating. They were clearly playing a different strategy to the other teams, maintaining possession, advancing the ball without needing to win battles, and retreating right the way back to their goalkeeper when attack wasn't bearing fruit or if the defense was pressuring them effectively. Sometimes the other teams would go minutes without touching the ball, and without Spain taking a shot on goal. I started thinking about how this style could be transposed to Ultimate Frisbee, where passing is essential, possession is even more valuable, and scoring is far easier than squeezing a ball past the goalkeeper into the opposing goal. At first I thought one of the keys to possession was the goalkeeper, having one player lagging way behind the play in order to receive a mega dump and redistribute the disc to other connected players when the defense would apply pressure. It felt like I was onto something, that I was looking at things from a new perspective, but I wasn't quite there yet. Then I looked at how they bounced the ball around in the midfield, and it became apparent that triangles were the building blocks, ensuring all the players were connected at a comfortable distance without crowding each other, providing multiple viable options. So I started sketching out how 6 players could be connected through triangles, with the goalkeeper at the back. Very quickly, it became obvious that the goalkeeper should be included with the rest of the players, and the hexagon shape emerged. All the triangles were then equilateral, which was the first of countless ways that Hexagon Offense began to write itself. I won't go through the details of the journey, trying to understand whether it worked, how to play it, and how to train it, and so on. I was very lucky to be coaching Brighton Club, Sussex University, and have supportive players and coaches around me who were open-minded enough to understand the potential and give it a shot. As with anything new, there were teething problems, but the first time Hex was played at a national level tournament was against the European champions Clapham. Our offense scored our first 3 points against their one-to-one defense so effectively that they switched to Zone D. We continued to score against variations of their zones until around 6-6, where they called a timeout and their captain told them they were going to mark one-to-one and completely concentrate on shutting out their individual matchups. Fair play to them, this was a great choice considering they were on another level of athleticism across the board to us, and they etched out a few turnovers over the remainder of the game to win eventually 15-12. This was the best result we had got against them for the last 8 years, which was remarkable considering it was the first time that this new style had been tried outside of our trainings. Fast forward to 2019, and every month I hear another team in another country has been playing Hex. Sometimes this is simply because it's something new and exciting, different, and other times it's because the person introducing it believes the fast-paced style of Hex suits their team better, or is simply their preferred way of playing Ultimate. Personally, Hex has taught me loads about the game. Previously I had no real concept of balance, individually or as a team, and only a very rudimentary understanding of teamwork, flow, tempo, and many other aspects of the game which seem fundamental to me now. It's taught me immeasurable amounts about defense too, which I haven't really even begun to touch on in my videos. By understanding balance, I have learnt to recognize imbalance, which is the first step to being able to fundamentally counter it. I've travelled around Europe running weekend-long Hex clinics in cities and with teams, and I've also watched Hex evolve and write itself. It's so powerful in its simplicity that there is an entire world of tactics waiting to be built upon its foundations, and so far we've only got a glimpse of these in teams that play Hex today. Stack-based offenses are all relatively similar to each other in a lot of ways. They share concepts such as throwing lanes, cutting channels, clearing out, handlers, cutters, resets, fills, active and inactive space, and these concepts are always referred to when defining how the offenses function. These concepts simply do not exist in Hex offense. They can be added, perhaps to bridge an understanding with players who are familiar with disciplined stack offenses. However, applying the concepts is essentially limiting the offense, and reduces Hex to a clunky type of stack offense in a way. Trying to explain or understand Hex via these concepts is not really possible. I'm not trying to be deliberately obscure. My point is that Hex isn't simply an alternative structure, but it's also vastly different in terms of how the field is viewed and how the game moves. It's a totally different style of play, and belongs in a different category to stack offenses, which is very hard to see if you are only familiar with playing the stack-based offenses. Let me explain this in a bit more detail. The use of space on the field is balanced in Hex. Therefore, there are no cutting channels, no throwing channels, or active or inactive spaces. You can see how an unbalanced use of space naturally generates these concepts. Players are equally and evenly distributed across the shape, which is relative to the disk, meaning there are no defined handlers, cutters, or resets. Every player on the field is treated equally, and each can employ the same movement and techniques. Any further roles or division of labour can be applied by a team as tactics, but are not necessary for Hex in its core form to function effectively. The shape maximises the options available. This means less effort needs to be expended on any one option, as there are multiple alternative options, each of which in turn opens further options. This is the polar opposite of the side stack, which aims to maximise yards on each pass, creating a large space directly downfield of the disc, where one option has all of the focus and all the effort for the first few seconds of the stall count, and where taking a reset pass temporarily reduces the options as the new disc position is more disconnected from the play. The origin of this play-based approach to Ultimate could be related to the influence of American football, and if the sport had developed elsewhere in the world, then the influence of soccer would have likely seen a more flow-based approach to the game. Essentially, stacking works as an offense because defense are marking one-to-one. The imbalances in space created by stacks work particularly well because the defenders stick to the offense players individually, opening up the space elsewhere on the field. When a team plays zone, the stack disappears. When a team start poaching, switching and sandwiching, as Pony was seen recently doing against Revolver, check out my analysis video on that on felixultimate.com, they can turn the space imbalance against the offense, using the large spaces as traps to generate turnovers. Some fundamental weaknesses of one-to-one defenses are negated by the pick rule, which I believe has stunted the development of defensive strategy in Ultimate by giving the defense a get-out clause when the one-to-one strategy's shortcomings are actually being highlighted. Think about it. When a pick happens, 9 times out of 10, the defense would have been more effective if they had switched or surrounded the initial offensive setup. However, it's the decision in the defenders' minds, the decision to employ that particular way of marking, which isn't mentioned in the rules at all, which means that these situations count as picks, and the offense is halted, and the defense can reset. Because one-to-one remains prevalent, stacks remain prevalent, and stacking is effective against one-to-one, so everyone's happy and nobody's desperately searching for an alternative way of playing offense. Yet. I have many thoughts on new fundamental approaches to defense which can be taught to players when they begin to play, and which I believe will tip the scales against stack offenses, so we will see unbalanced offenses less and less as time goes on. For now, if the defense plays strict one-to-one, then stacks are the logical counter. So, why play Hex? Well, it's future-proof, it encourages well-rounded skill sets, it builds teamwork and field awareness, it's fun, and it makes winning easier. The downsides include that it can take longer to train to play well, there isn't much footage to learn from, and it can be difficult for players to find their role on the field. The balanced nature of Hex means that no matter what the defense do, the fundamentals of the offense do not need to change. Regardless of how the defenders set up, the offense are positioned to maximize options, and utilizing any of the options available will open further options. If players are trained to utilise these options through movement and technique, then the advantages add up exponentially, and decision making becomes the critical factor to generating dangerous attacks whilst retaining possession. Learning Hex generates more well-rounded players who are adept at taking what the defense gives them and adapting to unfamiliar situations on the field. As several players are immediate options for the thrower and are behaving like a close proximity network to support continuous movement, this builds communication and teamwork skills constantly during play. Because no active or inactive space is defined, players must create and use space dynamically, and this develops their field awareness. The predefined nature of space and vertical stack offenses, with cutting channels which must be cleared out from and inactive space to stack up in, is like a shortcut for the offense, which means that players are never really tasked with developing field awareness for themselves. Passing the disc around quickly, throw and go moves, and having the freedom on the field to do what you like is a lot of fun. Many players who are adept in Hex are then kind of pained to go back to stacking up and the style of play that goes with it. Winning can be easier with Hex because the maximised options mean the onus is on making the right decisions, and victory can come without having to make big plays. In 2015, Brighton came third at UK Nationals just playing Hex, and it felt strange because it didn't feel like we'd done anything special to achieve it. No big plays and crunch situations came to mind. We wondered whether it was the competition that wasn't as fierce as previous years, but in reality it was the sound nature of our underlying strategy which simply made scoring points less dramatic and winning games less remarkable. Training players up to be able to utilise the variety of options they are presented with can take more time than players becoming adept with a few specific offensive looks. Learning the well-rounded way is great for all beginners to gain a good understanding of the many facets of the game, but when you have a team that are put together for a limited amount of time to perform effectively at a final event, it makes sense to spend time developing specific offensive looks, basically shortcuts to creating scores, which will work providing the defense do not counter them adequately. That said, it's much easier for a player to transition from having learnt Hex to playing any stack offense than it is to transition from learning any stack offense to playing Hex. Hex is a really good strategy to teach to beginners for a few reasons. The average beginner will get lots of opportunity to get involved as the disc moves around and they'll find themselves near to it, able to make a quick move to get it in their hands. If you have a really athletic beginner who's probably played other sports, then Hex is most similar to other team sports in terms of strategy. And if you have a beginner that hasn't played many other sports and isn't very athletic, then they won't really be able to disrupt the offense as much as they would something which is more rigid, because all the other players can just play around them if they're not making the right moves and not getting free, or you can't really clog space in Hex because everyone else can just kind of make up for it because you have this network of support. The rest of the offense can just kind of work around them. There are other offenses which are more rigid where they would clog up a lane or something and the whole offense would struggle because of that. But in Hex there's less pressure, there's less of those kind of pressure situations, less of those focal points, and if a player's moving erratically or in the wrong place or whatever, then the offense can continue to function pretty well around them. So with beginners, you just need to give them a few guidelines and they fall into it quite easily, and they continue having a lot of fun. A lot of second teams train Hex, so I've spoken to a few coaches where they will introduce Hex to their beginners, and then their second and their B and C teams will play Hex for the duration of the season. Because it will develop all their skills, they'll keep having fun whilst playing, and it will give them plenty of opportunities to get involved. Some players do not like the open-ended nature of Hex and prefer to have a solid play to work from. Often these players will ask, who initiates the downfield movement, or where does the first cut come from? And they usually aren't satisfied with the answer of, it depends what the defense gives you and what the players feel like doing. Experienced players are quite used to things being predefined, so in some ways have to unlearn as many things as beginners need to learn. It's key to view the offense not as a series of static situations, but as a fluid sequence which is always in motion. Credit to Frank Huguenard for trailblazing the way in this regard with his motion offense, the first ever flow-based approach to offense which helped shape many of my thoughts on Ultimate, and which he's been trying to explain to the community for years. When the disc is moving between players who employ balanced technique, in a balanced structure, the stall count should rarely reach 3 seconds. So the situation should usually be a fluid one, with offense, defense and the disc all in motion. There has been relatively little exploration into this flow-based approach to the game, the focus in recent decades being very much on a yard-based approach, so I see motion offense and Hex as just the beginning of an entirely new paradigm. The freedom of Hex brings with it both simplicity and complexity. Simplicity comes from standardisation. The thrower will always see the same setup in front of them when they face the centre of the space. Each player has the same role on the field. There are no specific rules or patterns to remember. The decision process is straightforward and the same for any situation, and the distances between the players are all kept roughly equal. The freedom that this approach brings means that the disc could move in any direction at any time, so players should be prepared to cut to any space as they see it developing, and throw to any option they are presented with at any time, which means a lot of possibilities. This unpredictability encourages great versatility from the offense, which can take longer to train and in turn makes the offense unpredictable for the defense, meaning it can be very hard to shut down when done well. Enough stories and intangible words and ideas. What is Hex, and how do you play it? What's the deal? Does it actually work? What are the downsides? There are three main elements to all offensive play: structure, movement, and technique. Each are equally important as the other. Usually an offense is defined almost solely by its structure, so that's what I'll talk about first. The hexagonal structure is made of equilateral triangles, the points of which are a comfortable distance away from each other, around 12 yards. If it's windy, or if the players are smaller, slower, or can't throw very accurately over distance, the distance between these points reduces. You want this distance to be comfortable so that a player can sprint towards or away from the disc and be able to receive a pass in stride. The structure is a shape rather than a formation. As the disc position changes, a formation such as horizontal or vertical stacks will shift and warp, whereas the hex shape stays constant and rotates relative to the available space. The thrower is usually on the edge of the shape to avoid one-to-one defenders surrounding the disc, and this provides a second level of continuation on a fundamental level. The central player in the shape I call the hat. You may wish to denote other names such as wings, backs, and forwards. However, I've recently moved away from giving these labels to players on the line, as I found they get attached to a particular position when they should be simply abiding by the shape and the movement principles. Often I'll just nominate 3 players to field the pull, and everyone else will just work together at the start of the point to maintain the shape in relation to them. Positions work better in formations than they do in shapes. Players will come and go from the centre of the shape. However, the hat is a useful point to keep track of, as it acts as a balance point for the shape, so everyone on the field should be aware of it, maintain it, and build the shape around it. When the disc is on the side, the shape extends perpendicular from the sideline, utilising the space most effectively. The shape will naturally deform during play, so all players should be making efforts to maintain the shape when they are not directly involved in the play around the disc. These movements to maintain shape after it is deformed can often be considered as cuts, which can be passed to. The shape is the supporting structure for the movement. The stall count should be kept as low as possible, so the decisions and actions of a player as the disc is coming towards them, when it's in their hands, and what they do immediately after it leaves their hands are critically important to the movement of the offense. The movement is based around principles and guidelines rather than cutting orders and patterns, and is best explained by what I call the hex movement decision tree. This decision tree serves as a guideline for how you should sustain the movement of the disc and how you should generate movement from a static start. The left side of this diagram here pertains to movement of the disc and the players that are very, very close to the disc. And the right side of the decision tree is more about the players who are off disc. So you can see the first question is, do you have the disc in your hands? If you do, then we go to the left side of the tree here. We have these 3 questions. If any of these 3 questions about people being open is yes, then you always take the open pass and then look for the return pass to come back to you. Okay, so this first question here, is someone open in front of you? If they are, then you take the open pass to them and you look for the return pass back, and then if you get the disc back, then you see you're in this loop here. So that's basically like a give-go kind of dribbling style loop. If the answer to any of these questions is maybe, then you fake. So if you're not comfortable with the throw, maybe you're not happy with the distance or the type of throw that's being asked, perhaps the weather conditions are unfavourable, defender is kind of half marking them. If you're not sure, then you fake that throw, right? And then you go back to asking yourself, is someone open in front of you? One of the benefits of faking is that you can get defenders to commit. Okay, if it's a believable, realistic option and you're just not confident on it, or you don't think the window's big enough, then putting in a good fake will mean that the defender has to bite, and that can make your teammate then free elsewhere. So after you fake, then it's worth staying looking at that teammate to see if they're free. So that's your first option. If someone is open in front of you immediately after you catch the disc, then you take that pass. If there's not someone open directly in front of you after you catch it, then your next look is for the previous thrower. Is the previous thrower open? Now, you know quite a lot about the previous thrower because you've been watching them throw to you. So you know their position, their defender's relative position, and it can be quite easy to tell if they're free or not immediately. If they're not, then you ask yourself if you can continue the path of the disc. So this means if the disc comes from the left and you catch it in the middle, then you will look to pass to the right afterwards, right, after checking the previous options. These last two can be interchanged, so in some situations it's easier to actually look back at the thrower, or you want to look back at the previous thrower before you look for the continue. That lends itself to a more dribbling kind of style of Hex. If you look to continue the path of the disc, then there's high risk that the flow will stop because you're not sure that somebody's going to be free in that direction. But it does work together quite well with the techniques that everyone's learned playing conventional offenses. So if none of these options are free or worth faking at, then you face the center of the space, which in Hex is where the hat sets up. Okay, and in Hex you should be able to see all the players on your team when you do this, so then you can ask yourself again, is anyone open in front of you? Now let's say that you went for the return pass and you didn't get the disc back in your hands. Okay, so the first question to ask yourself is, are you in good Hex shape? So if you're not in good Hex shape, then you should reposition. Okay, and reposition with urgency, because those repositioning moves are basically like cuts. If you reposition, then you might get the disc back in your hand simply from that move, and then you end up back in this loop over here. Okay, well, let's say that you've repositioned, so you are in good Hex shape, then are you open? Right? If you are, then communicate with the thrower. So this means putting a hand up to indicate that you're free, or maybe shouting to get their attention. Some kind of communication so that the thrower can see the option that you're providing. Hopefully this will get the disc in your hands. If it doesn't, and you're not open, then you ask yourself, is the thrower looking at you? If the thrower is looking at you, then you want to generate an option for them. So hopefully something that they can hit, but potentially something that they will fake at, and it will hopefully create more options. Okay, if they're not looking at you, so you're in good Hex shape, you're not open, the thrower is not looking at you, right? Then you ask yourself, can you create useful space for a teammate? If you moved, would the space that you leave behind be usable by any of your teammates? So you want to be looking around and seeing whether that's a possibility. If it is, then it's your turn to generate an option. Okay. If it's not, then you can just chill. Okay, because everyone's going through the same decision process. Ideally, the thrower is constantly looking to see if people are free, and there will at least be something that they can fake at. Bearing this decision tree in mind, let's have a look at some footage from SMOG. So you can see they're setting up from Hex, and they've got the central hat player here cutting deep immediately. So the player with the disc is facing the center of the space, sees the option, takes the option. Okay, disc in hands. Now in front is this direction over here. Okay, so that's where she's looking at first, see if there's an option. There was no option, so then she looked to continue the path of the disc, and she's clearly seen an option immediately free over here. Okay, now disc in hands facing this way, so it looks for the option directly in front of her. Puts a fake in because it was like not necessarily free, worth a fake, and there we go, the throw comes off very easily. So didn't have to look anywhere else, just went for the first option. Now catches, looks downfield, previous thrower isn't very interested, so now she turns and faces the center of the space. Okay, this is where she can see everybody. Immediately somebody comes back. It's the previous thrower, in fact, so still well in that decision tree. Previous thrower catches it, looks to continue the path of the disc. There we go, somebody's free continuing there. So now first look should be in front, which is this direction. Second could be back to the previous thrower at this point. Okay, so now I think he is looking at her. Okay, so therefore on the decision tree, this is her time to generate an option. Again, sure enough, she does. Plenty of space to work with. Catches it. This is the player that's open in front. Okay. However, a quick look to see continuing the path of the disc, and you see great cut timing here. Make that pass easy. Continuing the path of the disc, we see this player is free for the short pass here, and again continuing the path of the disc, and the huck's going to go. Nice job here to box out and go up with the right hand for the catch. So if we watch that back in full speed, you can see they're set up at the beginning. And this is a well played point by SMOG. They're keeping the flow very well. The disc doesn't really stay in anyone's hands for longer than maybe 3 seconds.
Yeah, that was potentially like 3 or 4. Maybe because they're slightly out of shape, but the shape is generally pretty good throughout this point. They're a little bit spread at this moment, but then they're able to get the passes off. And then this is really well-timed cuts to be able to be free for continuing the path of the disc. And a nice finish to it.
Now on to the last of the 3 fundamental elements, technique. Off disc, most of the time you will be near enough to the thrower to receive an immediate pass, starting in the centre of a bubble of space. You want to be able to provide an option quickly, so keep your shoulders facing the disc and be ready for a pass at any time. There are many possibilities. A thrower-led pass, a quick step into space, receiving the disc where you started your move, making a larger move across the shape looking for a pass, or going deep for a long throw. Whatever the defense gives you that the thrower can take. It's key to stay balanced before and during your moves, as there is plenty of freedom in the direction you choose, and you want to be able to react quickly when the disc is passed and when the angle of attack changes. Before catching the disc, providing you are not under immediate pressure from the defender, you should control your acceleration or deceleration to take the most benefit from the situation you are in. For example, if I'm cutting from left to right, aware that my defender is behind me moving from left to right, and I can see the previous thrower is in front of me moving from right to left, ideally I will decelerate into my catch. This serves 2 purposes. 1, I can throw quicker to the previous thrower, and 2, I'm ready to accelerate out of my throw from right to left against the velocity of my defender and with the movement of the disc, which makes a return pass more likely, keeping the stall count low, changing the angle of attack, and building on our advantage. This keeps our options maximised, and the defence are kept on the back foot. Decelerating into catches invariably means you are able to find your balance quicker, which puts you in a position to utilise any available option quicker. Accelerating into catches definitely has value too, and I should emphasise at this point that if a defender has any bid at the disc, then he should always attack it and be certain of the catch before thinking about anything else. Accelerating into the catch can also be useful if you wish to continue that momentum throughout your throw and your subsequent move into space for a return pass, and sometimes you'll want the disc in your hands earlier in order to make a subsequent pass quicker. It all depends on the situation. The key here is to control your acceleration and balance before the disc reaches you. Catching. I could talk for hours about catching on its own, but I won't get too deep into it here. Number 1 priority is safety, doing what you need to do in order to up your catching completion rate from 95% to 99%.
Here's a diagram that I made which shows the most appropriate catch depending on where the disc is coming into your body. For slightly higher or lower throws, then the player can jump to clap catch or crouch to clap catch, trying to get the disc as close to their chest as possible. And the rest of the diagram shows where one-handed catches and layout catches are more appropriate. If the disc is coming directly at your chest and it's flat, you can put either hand on top, whichever feels more comfortable. But if there's an angle to the disc, then you should put a certain hand on top. Okay, so if it's coming like this, I should put my right hand on top, because putting my left hand on top is poor technique. I'm having to twist my body, I'm having to cross my arms over. Okay, it's far more likely to go wrong. All right, this is a far better, more balanced, athletic way to catch the disc. Then conversely, if the disc is coming at this angle, then I'm putting my left hand on top. Okay, putting my right hand on top here means I'm twisting, even though it might feel more comfortable, at the beginning. Then over time, that's going to actually bring my percentages down, and it's better to learn the right technique like this. If the disc is not coming at your chest, if it's going up to the side, putting your right hand on top when it's up on this side, so that then your wrist acts as a backboard. Okay, if I go like that, then it's quite likely the disc will go through. Okay, whereas if the disc is flat coming in here, I want my hand and my wrist to be behind it as I make that catch. Makes it more reliable. Conversely, if it's down low, then I'm putting my left hand on top like that. Okay, and the opposite over the other side.
Now the disc is in your hands, there are 3 technique aspects I'd like to focus on: the neutral stance, pivot throws, and throw and go moves. The neutral stance, also called the power stance or the triple threat position, puts the thrower in a balanced position where they are prepared to quickly take any of the multitude of options which may present themselves at any time. Hold the disc with both hands at the front of the disc. If it were a clock face, you want your left hand at 11 and your right hand at 1 o'clock. This grip with both hands means you're already coiled up, ready to throw a backhand with either hand. Stand with your feet slightly wider than shoulder width apart and knees slightly bent. This is the stance you should adopt when facing the centre of the space, seeing if anyone is open. Pivot throws. These are used when you need to step around a defender to break the force or to generate power on your throw. You step out and release the disc from a stable position with both feet on the ground. Quick side note, do you think the technique that top players use for flick hucks is the ideal mechanics technique if you disregard the rules of Ultimate and just want to throw a flick really far? In reality, the best mechanics for a long flick actually involve stepping forward with the opposite leg, as seen with bowlers, pitchers, and disc golf pros. But once you throw a pivot foot into the equation, it changes things. This is why even the most athletic beginners will step forward with the wrong foot when they first learn a flick. Pivot throws are very common in the game, but for the purpose of defining techniques suited to Hex, I'm making a distinction between pivot throws and throw and go moves. Throw and go moves are where you control your balance in such a way that you accelerate rapidly out of your throw, in a direction of your choosing. Before releasing the disc, you overbalance in the direction you wish to accelerate. At the moment of release, you keep your pivot foot on the ground, and immediately after the release, you push off and break into a run. Of course, you must not lift your pivot foot before releasing the disc, and even if you do this move correctly, it can still look or feel like a travel to the opposition. So, in order to reduce the chance that travel will be called, you can emphasize a couple of aspects of this technique. 1. Keep your non-pivot foot lifted off the ground at the moment of release by raising your off-pivot knee. Or 2. Keep your non-pivot foot near to your pivot foot until the last possible moment. Throw and go moves should be used whenever a pivot throw is unnecessary, as it makes it much more likely that you can receive an immediate return pass, thus retaining flow and makes the most out of your offensive advantage when the disc is in your hands. The easiest time to get free from your defender is at the moment that you release the disc. It's also very easy to break the force the moment you catch the disc, which is one of the reasons why flow has value in its own right. Once a team is in flow, within a structure which sustains flow, then it's very difficult for the defense to stop them moving the disc around for more than a second. They can perhaps stop the flow going towards the end zone, maybe even stop the break as well, but if the offense are happy to continue flow away from the end zone without hesitation, then the defense must be very overpowered in order to stop that as well. Once a team are adept at sustaining flow, they can control the tempo of the game and pick their options to either mount an attack or to retreat as is appropriate to the situation. That concludes the How to Play Hex section. Essentially, abide by the 3 key principles and be mindful not to fall into stack habits, not all of which I've mentioned here. So how do you train Hex with your team? It's not feasible to monologue to your team for half an hour or to point them in the direction of a half-hour video and expect them to absorb it all. Players mostly learn by doing, so let's talk through some drills and exercises you can set up and run at practices, which will help with the introduction of Hex. Firstly, do not think that all these drills are the be-all and end-all of training Hex. They are simply exercises which I have created, which were suitable for the teams that I was training at that particular time, and what your team needs could be different. I encourage you to be creative and design your own drills which abide by the principles and train the key elements. Try to focus on one at a time, and cycle through them so players get a broad and coherent understanding of the offense. When drilling each of these elements, remind players of the principle at work so they can put the exercise into context. Hex is a very new strategy, and the best and most fun and effective ways of training it are likely yet to be designed. I hope I've clearly explained the various concepts and facets of Hex offense, and I wish you all the best with learning how to play or to teach Hex with your team. I'm excited to see what is built upon this approach to offense in the future. If you're interested in developing further, then I can offer you something I call live online video analysis. This is basically remote coaching, where your team has footage of them playing analysed live via YouTube. We arrange a time and a date, I send you a link, you and your team all tune in and say hello in the chat, and I go through your footage in detail, drawing on the screen to illustrate particular points, answering questions via the live chat, and talking about what stands out to me and anything you've asked me to look at in particular. If you're interested in this, then do get in touch, it will help you improve and win more. It's also possible for us to arrange a visit to your city with Hex-trained coaches to run a Hex clinic over a weekend, where your whole team or community can learn at the same time, bringing everybody onto the same page. I hope you have fun and win in Ultimate, and I'll see you again soon.